Hi, this is Dennis Downing. I've got another short story for you. It's a good one. It's from my collection of short stories called Epitaphs Written in Blood. The name of this short story? The Cabin. Back in the 1980s, the Holton Corporation, a group of physician investors from San Francisco, bought enough land on the Crow Indian Reservation to build 100 cabins. The sites were overlooking the Yellowstone Reservoir. There was a steep switchback road leading to the lake where there was a small boat launch. The government, however, had a different idea. They built a huge modern launch on the other side of the lake, making the Holton launch obsolete. Because of the loss of lake access, only 6 cabins were built on 50 acres of land in the middle of the Crow Reservation. One of the cabins had been built by Edith and Oscar Grumman. Edith and Oscar were retired and spent most of their time at the cabin. That is, until Oscar died. With Oscar dead, Edith had to sell the cabin. It was a beautiful cabin built of cedar planking with a gigantic picture window overlooking the canyon below. But the 9 miles of rocky road leading to the cabin was nearly impassable. Because of that, it was nearly impossible to sell the cabin. Initially, Edith was asking $60,000 for the cabin. But after a year, with no offers, she lowered the price to $40,000. The following year, she had 4 potential buyers. A couple purchased the cabin, but when they died that year, their kids defaulted on the loan, which was carried by Edith. She was at a loss. There was no one else to sell the cabin to. She tried to sell the cabin for $40,000. Becky and Danny Hart had lived in Billings, Montana for 3 years. Becky was a nurse at Billings Medical Center, and Danny was a pharmacist at Western Drug. They were a handsome couple. Becky was 40 years old, 5 foot 6 inches tall, and had the shape of a 20-year-old. She had black hair, which she wore in a ponytail, and she had a smile that would warm a block of ice on a winter day. Danny was 5'9". He wore his hair short. He had a full beard and a mustache, and he didn't have the figure of a 20-year-old. There had recently been inherited $30,000 when Becky's mother died. On Friday the 13th of May, Becky came home with great news. "Hey, Danny, guess what happened to me today?" she said with an "I won the lottery" look on her face. "You look like a cat who swallowed the canary," he told her. "Lisa Abbey told me there was a cabin on Yellowstone Reservoir for sale. The cabin's worth $60,000, and the seller, Edith Grunneman, has been trying to sell it for 2 years. Just recently, she sold the cabin, and the buyers died, leaving the loan in default. Edith had been the backer of the loan. And there is a line of people that want to buy the cabin. She's selling it for $10,000. If there's 10 people already in line, that doesn't sound very. You don't understand, she broke in. Understand what? We were the first in line, she said, dangling the keys from her right hand. You mean I bought it? She was literally bursting at the seams. Sight unseen? Sight unseen. Can we go there this weekend? I suppose if we own it, we ought to go and see what we've bought. You're not mad at me? You said it's worth $60,000. Why should I be mad? On Saturday, they were packed and ready to go. The cabin was 60 miles from Billings. 40 miles was on the freeway. 10 miles was two-lane highway leading to Hardin. The last 9 miles was a road that a monster truck driver would shy away from. Becky and Danny owned a four-wheel drive Bronco. The road into the cabin was dirt and rock. It was as steep as a cow's face. It took them nearly an hour to negotiate the road. But when they got to the cabin, they were thrilled with their purchase. The cabin looked beautiful, and the view was breathtaking. When they entered the cabin, they were awestruck. The picture windows overlooking the lake were 20 feet wide and 12 feet high. The fireplace and chimney were made of canyon rock. The floors were hardwood, and the kitchen was a chef's dream. There was a giant living room and luxurious bedrooms. It was breathtaking. Their nearest neighbors, Lisa and her husband Jerry, owned a cabin a half a mile away. It was on the rim of the 1,000-foot high canyon wall. During the ensuing year, Becky and Danny made good use of the beautiful cabin. They brought family and friends alike to visit. They bought a Glastron boat and took everyone and their dog water skiing on the Yellowtail Lake. They barbecued and had birthday parties, even a family reunion. To the events, they invited the people that had originally told them about the cabin, Lisa and Jerry Abbey. One evening, everyone was gathered around a big campfire telling jokes and stories. Danny told a story he had read in a horror magazine. It was about a boy that had killed his father and tried to get his best friend to help him bury the body. The last line of the story was, "Wicked chickens lay deviled eggs." Jerry was the last of the circle. He said he had a true story and apologized to Becky and Danny before he told it. The story was about a couple who had died in one of the cabins above the lake. He said the couple had loved their cabin and spent every spare weekend there, much like Becky and Danny. And he said they had come upon an old Indian cave in one of the cliffs. The cave was filled with pictographs drawn by an ancient race. They took their family and friends to visit the cave. The husband found 5 arrowheads in the cave, and he brought them back to the cabin. Jerry said the couple died, and rumor had it that the group of Indians had killed them for trampling on their sacred ground. He said that the cabin had been decimated. Now, I'm not saying the story is true, Jerry told them. It happened before Lisa and I bought our cabin. But there's a decimated cabin around the point from where our cabin lies. Let's go over and see it in the morning. In the morning after breakfast, everyone was excited to see the remains of the cabin. They set out in their LL Bean clothes and trendy hiking boots for the site of the story. Sure enough, There was the destroyed remains of a large cabin on the rim of the canyon, just 1 mile from Lisa and Jerry's place. All that was left of the cabin was a concrete foundation, the floor timbers, and fireplace that was the twin of the one Becky and Danny owned. While they were there, Jerry found an arrowhead made of chert, the stone that lined much of the canyon walls. "Do you know where the cave is that the couple discovered?" Danny asked Jerry. "I sure do," Jerry told him. "It's above the road going down to the lake, the road that was supposed to be the old boat ramp." "Let's go there," one of the college kids said. "Yeah, let's go," a second chimed in. There were 6 people in the group that hiked down to the abandoned ramp that day. Danny, Becky, Jerry, and 3 of the college kids. Finding the trail leading to the cave wasn't an easy affair. There were 4 steep gullies leading from the road up to the cliffs. The gullies were filled with chert, gravel, and sand. They were almost impossible to climb. There was also brush on the way up, sage. One of the college boys slipped and fell 20 feet down one of the gullies. He was okay, except for a few rips and tears in his jeans, and a boogered elbow, and a gash where his pride used to be. It took them 3 hours to find a trail to the crack leading to the caves. The crack was only 5 inches wide, and it rose 50 feet nearly straight up. One of the more daring boys was the first to make the climb. It was precarious at best, but he made it. From the caves, he tossed down a rope, and everyone tried to scale the crack. One by one, the group climbed into the caves using the rope and the sagebrush. There were 3 large inverted domes in the first cave. The domes were filled with pictographs. There were spiders, deer, buffalo, and a drawing showing a ladder formed by a pine tree to one of the caves. It was like an ancient map to a gold mine or buried treasure. On the far side of the first cave, there was a large horizontal crack at the base of the rock. The crack was in the shape of a smile. Looking through the crack, they could see dark tomb on the other side. The crack was only 10 inches high and 15 feet deep. Danny was the first to attempt crawling through the claustrophobic nightmare. He spidered his way into the crack on his back. Just 5 feet into the crawl, his heart began to hammer. The sweat began to drizzle down his face, and his chest tightened like it was in a vice. He panicked and nearly got stuck scrabbling back out of the crack. The next to try the feat was a boy who had lost his pride on the hike up. He was a scarecrow with matchstick legs and arms. It was a tight squeeze, but he made it through without a hitch. Once the matchstick boy made it through, he coached the other boys and Danny and Jerry to the other side. They needed flashlights on the other side. Except for the smile of light, the cave was coal black. There were 3 tunnels leading deeper into the caverns. One led to a room that would have been large enough for an enormous chunk that had dropped in the ceiling. Another tunnel led to a large room with a black ceiling. It smelled vaguely of ancient fire and smoke. There were rocks gathered around a central pit that gave it the appearance of a small amphitheater. In the middle, where a fire must have been, was an ember-darkened skeleton. Matchstick Boy claimed the skull for his dorm room back in college. Each of the other 2 boys scarfed black femurs. Upon exiting the dark caverns, they learned that Becky had found a chert arrowhead in a pile of chips. It was a sign of good fortune. There were 3 rocks surrounded by the pine on the way down. It looked like a spot where Indians had gathered to nap tools. Looking at the painting of the pine tree leading to the cave, one of the boys walked a small ridge to another inverted dome. On the far side of the dome, there was indeed an ancient pine tree leaning against the cave. They used the pine tree to climb down from the caves, then slid on their butts to the road below. It was Sunday, so after lunch, everyone packed up for the trip home. Everyone but Danny and Becky, who had taken the following week off. That night was a romantic interlude for the couple. They barbecued tenderloin steaks out on the wraparound deck, followed by passionate love by the firelight. At midnight, they went out onto the wraparound deck, lay on their backs side by side, and counted satellites. They were just following number 7 across the sky when the sound started. It was very faint. You would have thought it was a sound mirage if it weren't for the beat. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. As time passed, the sound got louder. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. The louder and louder still, and louder even more. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. Thud, wump, wump. Where do you think that sound's coming from? Danny asked. Sounds like drums, Becky said. Look, there's light, Danny said. Where? Becky asked. There, in the Indian caves, he told her. Do you think the college boys returned for a party? She asked. They had school tomorrow, he said. The couple went to bed, but it was difficult to sleep. At 2 a.m, the drums suddenly stopped. Just as Becky and Danny were dozing off, there came a horrendous crash. It was the front window pane. There was firelight coming through the bedroom doorway. Danny looked out. The living room was ablaze. The living room's on fire, Danny shouted. We have to jump out the bedroom window. Who is whooping out there? She hollered. Hell, I don't know. Come on. When they got outside, there were ghostly Indians riding flaming red horses. Look, he cried. You can see right through them. Sure enough, they weren't real. They were apparitions. Run, Danny screamed. His voice cracking, but when he looked back, a blue flaming arrow passed through Becky's chest. Danny saw an Indian throw blue flaming spears. He was caught by one of the spears in his chest. It passed through him, and he caught fire. It was 3 weeks before Lisa and Jerry Abbey returned to the cabin. They were shocked to see the Holt cabin burnt to the ground. All that was left was the concrete foundation, a few floor timbers, and the cast iron water tank. There was something on the slab of the concrete in the doorway. Lisa picked it up. It was an arrowhead. When they called their son at college to tell him of the accident, he told them that the car with the 3 boys that had entered the cave had been burnt to the ground. There was nothing but charred bodies and a shell. The boys were never found.